Sup guys, and welcome to what is essentially our wish list for Dark Souls 3. We're going to go over a few things that we want in the game, and some of the things that we wish were changed in the game that we know of already. So let's start this off with the first point.
Yeah, okay, so I think the first thing that should definitely be added to Dark Souls 3 is an arena, because Dark Souls 1 had an arena, and although it was kind of unpopulated, the way it worked was really great, and it was probably unpopulated because it was in the DLC, but essentially it meant that you could have 3v3s in an arena type environment, and it
Free-for-alls?
Yeah, and it means that when you die, you don't...
It doesn't end.
Yeah.
It just continues. It's just, if you kill someone, you get a point, and then whoever has the most points wins.
Yeah, that system works so much better compared to what we've got now, where it's just like, one death and then that's you.
Also, right now, 2v2s are just kill the host and you win the 2v2.
Yeah, exactly.
So that doesn't work out very well.
Arena would fix that. Also, if they were to implement Arena, just make it so you don't go into a red aura. Just make it so it's just your character.
Yeah,
that way it's
let
better
us
to cosplay.
fashion.
Yeah, exactly.
Let us fashion in the arena. Okay, and the next thing that we would like to see make a return, obviously, is soul vessels. Now, those things were really good because it allowed you to fix mistakes that you made in your build, which of course was perfect in Dark Souls 1. If you made a mistake in your build, you had to either deal with it and play the build that way, or you had to start again, which wasn't very good. But Dark Souls 2 did give you the option where you could respec mistakes you made, and even respec your build entirely so that you could try out different builds. And it means that if you built for a certain weapon that turned out to be garbage, you could build into something else at the drop of a hat, and it was really fun.
Yeah, exactly. Now, it's worrying the fact that there isn't any soul vessels in Bloodborne. It may have been because there's much less content in Bloodborne, so that would have then been cutting the replayability
Even more. Yeah.
But we hope to see soul vessels in Dark Souls 3 simply because we're so versatile in Dark Souls 2, and now that we've got them, we would hate to not have them.
Yeah, like don't give us these little pleasures of life and take them away. Don't bait us with a carrot.
Yeah, exactly. Right, so something else we want to see is a good punishment for death. Now, Dark Souls 2 got it pretty well because when you died, your health went down a little bit, and it then gave you an incentive to not die. In Dark Souls 1, they made it so when you went hollow, you couldn't be invaded, and if anything, that was really just an upside for certain people. There was no real punishment to death in Dark Souls 1. And then in Demon Souls, the punishment for death was way too high. And in Bloodborne, there wasn't even a punishment for death, but we feel that Dark Souls 2 really has that down pretty well. We also think that even if you're dead or alive, you should be able to get invaded regardless.
Yeah, don't because when you restrict the gameplay via the death mechanic like in Dark Souls 1, you cut out a significant part of the game.
Yeah, and it's just abusable. If you don't want to play online and get invaded, just play offline. Okay, so another thing is bring back a good UI. Dark Souls 2, the UI wasn't perfect, but it was certainly an improvement over all the other games. Something that we would like to see is, non-list based menus like Dark Souls 2, but also the fact, the quick equip thing that Bloodborne had, where as soon as you press the menu to come up, you could just go straight to an equipment piece to change. That was really good. So, things like that we would want to see.
The triggers to cycle your weapon hands and armor slots as well was really handy.
What we don't want to see is list-based menus.
Like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls.
And just get to fuck.
Dark Souls 2 done it a lot better because it was faster, because instead of you having to press down a bunch of times, you could cycle left and right between your weapons, and it was just quicker. It was more user-friendly. Another thing as well is character previews. Don't have the menu take up the entire screen. Show your character on the side, and just as something new they could add in, show us a preview of what the armor would look like if we put it on without us actually equiping it.
Yeah, that's something that I'd like to see.
That would be pretty. That would just to make it a little bit faster. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
No useless stats. I want to feel like I've not wasted any points in a stat, and one stat isn't way better than the other. For instance, resistance was a complete waste.
Yeah, just as luck in Demon Souls, and Arcane is
very limited stats. Make the stats sort of work with each other to a certain degree, and make them not be a complete waste of time and investment.
We definitely want to see equip weight come back as its own stat. I hope more than anything that comes back from Dark Souls 2 is equip weight as its own stat, more than anything. It just balances the game out a bit more, just having it as its own stat. So I mean, it's kind of the same with Arcane as well in Bloodborne. That was kind of underpowered. So
it's a waste. It's you didn't really get much out of Arcane in the end because there wasn't really a lot of utility in it, in a sense, when it came to PvE or PvP, because most of the spells were shit.
And then when you look at adaptability in Dark Souls 2, it was a very useful stat, but that had to be balanced a bit more in terms of the fact that soul memory is a thing and there was no 150 meta, so that then just made adaptability super overpowered because people just max it out and be whatever level they wanted to be. So
so no useless stats, and of course no overwhelmingly strong stats as well, like blood tinge and adaptability.
Okay, so in terms of level design, we feel that it needs to be a combination between Bloodborne, Demon Souls, and Dark Souls 1. So you want the interconnected world that Dark Souls 1 had. Dark Souls 1 really felt like an actual, a place. Bloodborne done this pretty well also. However, Bloodborne and Demon Souls have the one drawback of you have
necessary
to...
hub.
The necessary hub. You have to go back to the Hunter's Dream. You have to go back to the Nexus. You have
Breaks
to go
the flow of gameplay.
Yeah, you have to go through loading screens.
Like
However,
you said, it doesn't feel like a one massive region as well. Like Dark Souls 1 just felt like one huge region of like part of a country. But Bloodborne, it was just, I'm here, now I'm going to go back here, now I'm here, now I'm going to go back here. There was no like flow to the game.
However, the levels themselves in Bloodborne and Demon Souls are amazing.
Phenomenal.
They all interconnect and link around into each other, and apparently that is something that's going to be in Dark Souls 3, and that's exciting, but hopefully they do not have this necessary mandatory hub that you need to go back to like in Dark Souls 2 and in Bloodborne and in Demon Souls.
Yeah, let us level up at bonfires and shit like that. Like, don't make us go back to a certain place to do everything like you did in Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne.
It just makes you end up resenting those places as opposed to Firelink, where you welcome it, you get back to Firelink and you're like, it's here, it feels safe, it's great. But then when you have to go back to the Hunter's Dream, you're just like, fucking Hunter's Dream.
Now I go back to the Hunter's Dream, I go through the motions, now I go back into the fight. But Firelink, you'd be like, I'm here again, this is nice.
Yeah, so none of that pish.
The next point as well I want to bring up is that we don't want there to be, like, we don't want it to instantly throw you into NG+, like when you beat Gwyn and when you beat Gehrman or Moon Presence, it just throws you into NG+, you need to start over. Dark Souls 2 done it really well, where after you beat Nishandra and you go through the 10 minutes of fucking credits, that it didn't actually throw you into NG+. Yeah. And I think it would have been a lot worse if after the credits you just get immediately launched into NG+, because then there's credits at 8 minutes now and you can't skip them and you just go straight into NG+. Yeah, thanks game. Now I can't go anywhere with all the shit I've just got.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
it was also very PvP friendly, which I like, obviously.
Yeah. Speaking of PvP friendly, I was really against the fact that they locked some items into NG+, like, it was either you had to get this item by maxing out a Covenant at like 300 fucking tokens, or you had to go into NG+2 with certain souls to buy it. Yeah. Of course, speaking about like Chaos Fireball and Wrath of God and shit like that, which was bullshit. Instead of doing that, don't incentivize us with items that are locked into NG+, like that, where it gives you a PvP advantage or something like that. Give us cool reward items. Maybe give us reskinned weapons, something like that, as like a bragging rights reward for doing NG pluses and so on.
Yeah, nothing that would affect people's overall gameplay, but just something that would add, like, give you an incentive to do New Game Plus without needing to do New Game Plus.
I'd do Scholar NG Plus for my blue longsword. Yeah. I would.
Okay, so the next thing we want to see is interesting, cool NPCs. Now, Dark Souls done this wrong, and it's obviously quite hard to pinpoint exactly
how. Dark Souls 2.
Dark Souls 2. But Dark Souls 1 NPCs, you really felt connected to them, and they were all very unique in terms of the way their quests began and ended and stuff. But in Dark Souls 2, there's a lot of copy-paste quests, and they're all very regimented, and you know exactly what you need to do. We don't want that. We want more organic, free-flowing NPCs. Just some way that you feel connected to them in the way, you know, they could affect the world a bit more. I mean, there's obviously improvements that you could have over Dark Souls 1, but even regardless of that, Dark Souls 2 just... it was difficult to feel connected to those characters, and obviously Dark Souls 1 done it so well, we would love to see a return to form in that case anyway. Yeah,
Dark Souls 1 NPCs felt like actual people on a journey with you. They felt like actual people in the world, whereas in Dark Souls 2 it's just a player model with a mask. Yeah. I never want Sunbro to die, but fuck Lucatiel.
Yeah, who gives a
shit about Lucatiel? And their fucking brother Oslatiel, who cares?
Okay, so the Covenants in both Bloodborne, Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1 all seem to fall at the last hurdle. Obviously, soul memory was a huge thing for Dark Souls 2. Covenants basically just didn't exist in Bloodborne, and when there's so much potential in Bloodborne, like holy shit. And for Dark Souls 1, there's a lot of really just useless, tiny Covenants that basically done nothing.
Gravelords. You got nothing from Gravelords, essentially.
Yeah, so really, when it comes down to it, we want, you know, very different, strong, unique Covenants. Just taking the best from all the best Covenants that already exist.
Mirror Knight Covenant.
Yeah, which would have been incredible. So just stuff like that, you know, Dark Wraiths, like strong. Oh, we also want a fucking infinite eye orb, please.
Oh yeah, that, please that, for the love of fucking god, that, because that makes Arena obligatory if you don't have that, and exactly. I don't really like Arena PvP, but I put up with it.
Exactly, so, you know, Covenants is really just a big thing, and, you know, we want a good Dragon Covenant, we want a good
Dark Wraiths,
Way of Blue,
Blues.
Blue Sentinels, Dark Wraiths, all of this. And for the love of it, the fact that soul memory isn't in it means this game has the highest potential to have really fucking great Covenants. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for Covenants.
And another point we want to bring up just before we get into the smaller points that we're bringing to the table here is we want some appearance customization in the sense of like equipment, because in Dark Souls 2 a lot of the armors are just slightly off color,
and it fucking annoys me.
It annoys me so much about the fashion when one armor is just a slightly different shade of grey. Like, give us a way to like even just change the tint on it, Let us change the colour if you're feeling generous.
Let's change the colour of the cloth parts.
Let us fuck about with like the shield decal and shit like that. Let's customize our builds to a deeper degree, so that we can fashion better.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the PvP player base is pretty dedicated to looking good.
Exactly.
More than being optimized at this point in Dark Souls 2, because there's that amount of content you can do that. So let us take it a step further and just let's tweak it a little bit to our own wants and desires.
Okay, so that's kind of like our 10 main points that we'd like to see in the game, but there's a few other smaller things that we can kind of rattle off that are just some require a bit more discussion, really. So first thing I'd like to see is when it comes down to farming, just stop giving things tiny drop rates where we just need to grind against something for ages.
Or at the very least, if it has a tiny drop rate, the more we kill that certain thing, make the drop chance increase so that we're actually rewarded for farming.
Yeah.
That would literally make the game infinitely more playable, because we wouldn't feel like we're banging our heads against a fucking wall for 20 minutes trying to get the sword that drops off of only 2 enemies in the game. Dark Souls 1.
Yeah, exactly, so there's that.
Next thing, of course, content, at least as much as Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
They really, really fucked up Bloodborne by putting basically nothing in it in comparison to Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, again, when people go, oh, quality over quantity, even if you took all the shit weapons out of Dark Souls 2...
And all the shit armors.
Yeah, there's still, like, 5 times as many good things as in Dark Souls 2 than there is in Bloodborne. And there's still shit things in Bloodborne, so...
I'm a huge fan of the quality over quantity, but at least give me the choice to use shit stuff, so that I can feel better about myself when I beat people that are using good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me challenge myself instead of making everything great.
So, another thing we don't want is really awful stats effects. Every single Souls game has had something totally bullshit.
Frenzy, curse, petrification.
Exactly. None of this crap. Look,
Plague.
If poison's fine, but if you can't think of something else, just don't fucking add it in. Right, okay, so something that we know is in the game, which really shouldn't be, and
Get your guns ready.
Fuck anybody for arguing, but instant backstabs are in it, and they shouldn't be. Now, before anyone says, instant backstabs, that raised the skill ceiling of Dark Souls, no, it just focused the whole PvP around it. But when anything anybody ever mentions about Dark Souls 1 PvP, it just involves backstabs, and that should not be
every negative thing that people mention about Dark Souls 1 PvP, like any negative experiences, involve being chain stabbed over and over again or some shit.
And if you keep going like, oh, Dark Souls 2 is just R1 spam, then you're actually awful at Dark Souls 2 and you need to get better at that. So really, you're bad at Dark Souls 2.
You can spam in Dark Souls 2, let's be fair, but at the same time, you can't sit there and say that Dark Souls 1 instant backstabs aren't exploitable.
Oh, because
they are.
You can't just put on Giant's Armor and spam R1 with the fucking gold tracer. Oh no, you can't do that in Dark Souls 1.
I mean, there's that as well, yeah.
And that's basically uncounterable.
Instant backstabs, we don't think they're fair. It's just... Yeah, I don't like that they're back.
But another thing that they've actually possibly taken out of Dark Souls 3 is dual wielding. Now, we would kind of like to see dual wielding return, although it seems like they've got a sort of Bloodborne thing where some weapons can turn into 2.
Yeah, like Legion Scimitars, that's what I think dual wielding's going to be, is it's going to be down to certain weapons as opposed to just you can dual wield whatever you want.
We would rather be able to make our own combos.
Like
dual wielding was a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, I liked dual wielding the curved nil greatsword with the smelter sword and being like this flaming Beyblade.
Yeah, exactly.
Alright, so the next thing we want to talk about, of course, is the requirements for certain weapons don't really make sense. Prime example would be Macedon Greatsword versus the Greatsword, Ultra Greatsword, of course, where the Macedon had a higher strength requirement, but it weighed less, and that didn't make a lot of sense.
We understand differences in terms of like class, but that's just, I mean, it's basically the same kind of weapon, but it just doesn't make sense to us. Dex, yeah, we can get behind Dex. Yeah. But this works for, we want to see our scaling actually mean something. For instance, you can, in Dark Souls 1, you can lightning infuse a claymore, but at base stats that does more damage than 40 into strength or dex, can't remember what one, with a Black Knight sword. So that just completely unbalances the game in terms of the amount of effort you have to invest for some things. So that's something that we'd like to see changed, definitely.
Yeah, speaking of requirements, of course, requirements to do with spells is a big issue that we have with the Souls game right now, where they're putting walls up so that you can't use certain sorceries, like 53 intelligence for Crystal Soul Spear, when instead what they should do is not have these requirements in place, but just say, you know what, you can use any spell so long as you meet the requirements for your staff, you can use any sorcery. But know that if you actually invest in intelligence and invest more of your build into this particular stat, these spells are going to be a lot better. Instead of going, you can only use this spell at 53 intelligence. Let us decide when it's worth it to use that spell.
Exactly.
prime example of this, and it's literally, it's annoying that this is a thing. Pyromancy has 0 requirements. And it doesn't make sense, aside from attunement, but everything has an attunement requirement when you're talking spells. So all of them are restricted by that one thing. But Pyro is the only one that isn't restricted by a requirement like the rest of the game, and that doesn't make a lot of sense.
I mean, Pyromancy is still actually quite balanced in terms of
I think it's unbalanced because it doesn't have an investment, but it still does damage of spells that you have to invest in. Like, Forbidden Sun does the damage of Soul Spear, for instance, and that's a 40 intelligence investment as well as...
Oh, in that case, like, Pyromancy in itself is balanced, but then when you compare it to other stuff, it doesn't make sense.
The way they've done Pyromancy works really well, aside from the fact that I think the base damage is too high. What they should do is lower the base damage and give you a bigger reward for investing in the scaling damages.
And the requirement for actual Pyromancy Flame, but
let's be honest, a Pyromancy Flame should probably have at least a 15 intelligence and faith requirement for talking balancing it against the rest of the items in the game.
But basically Pyromancy just has a base damage plus a scaling damage, which makes sense for all the castings, really.
Do that for everything, but just have it as a low base damage and get massive scaling bonuses.
So what the issue should be is, instead of being like held back by the requirement for the spell itself, the casting tools itself should improve or give different effects on your castings, but they're the things that have the intelligence and faith requirements.
Yeah, so you go back to the magic adjust system and that backs up the intelligence and faith requirement, because if you're using a staff that has a higher requirement, then you're going to get a better magic adjust bonus out of that.
Yeah.
And then the
your
spells
will
have
do more damage.
Yeah, exactly. Then your spells would have their multiplier that would work off of the magic adjust, which of course works off of your scaling.
But it means if you want to be a minor mage, like you said, you could then still have, like, put a little bit of investment in this, get your casting tool, you could still equip the spells that you want, but you'll just be doing less damage.
You can still use Crystal Soul Spear, which is great because it has a small shield piercing effect, and you're not restricted by a 53 intelligence wall. You might do hardly any damage, but it's your choice to run it at that low damage. Give people the choice and incentivize them to invest in something instead of saying, no, you're not doing this until you do this.
And spicing was just a clunky way of investing. Like,
spicing didn't even work, by the way, because it's shit all over the base damage so much that you got basically 0 scaling damage and it done nothing.
Exactly.
And of course, if you spice down a buff, it would last 10 seconds, which is fucking useless.
Which is another thing. We do not want to see being able to buff infused weapons.
Yeah, fuck that. That ruined the Dark Souls. That made the Dark Souls 2 PvP so unbalanced.
Exactly.
That was a train wreck. Buffed katanas just destroyed the arena because of the amount of damage they could put out, and that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. Dark Souls 1 done it right, where you could only buff weapons that were in their standard state or that were raw or something like that, so they didn't have split damage, and that was good. But being able to buff a weapon's split damage by like 30% with like Sunlight Blade and shit, like, I don't know what the exact stat is, but it's a pretty high fucking increase on a weapon that already does split damage and is infused, compared to a weapon that isn't.
Now, something that we do like, though, is the way you actually infuse your weapons in Dark Souls 2. It's been so much better and easier and streamlined from the other Dark Souls games, and it's just unnecessary, the hoops you need to jump through for the other Souls games.
But we do like the variety of option in Demon Souls, where you can have like these slightly different effects. Like, there was one that gave you really good dex scaling, you get a shitload of physical damage out of it. And then there was another one that gave you really good dex scaling, but you would get less damage out of it, and it would improve your bleed on the weapon, for instance.
Yeah.
There was that sort of variety. Of course, there was weapons like that scale with faith. One would
health regen.
Yeah, one would have health regen, and one would just get really good faith scaling damage. Shit like that would be really nice. That's another thing as well. Auxiliary effects on armors would be really cool, and auxiliary effects on shields. I know they still do that with like the Grass Crest shield.
But a little bit more of it.
Yeah, a little bit more of it. Like, give us some really cool armor choices. It's like the Hexers who'd given you like free stats and stuff. That's really cool. That's really fun. And it lets you optimize your builds to a whole new way, where you can really like invest a shitload into optimization. And of course, if there's no requirements on shit, then you've just got this massive choice of shit that you can work with. And if you want to make it really good in one particular way, you can do that. Yeah, you have the choice to do that, and it's not a case of I have to. You get the choice to do it.
Basically, these systems just then give you incentives for actually using your stats, as opposed to just going to base stats and getting max damage out of no investment.
It puts more weight on it puts more weight on the stat as well, so that you actually feel like you feel much. It's a much tougher choice if you're playing to meta.
Yeah, and finally, the last thing we probably want is make it so pyromancy is staff. Pyromancy and magic is staff based, and hexes and miracles are time based.
Yeah, streamline it. Like, try and streamline it as much as possible so that it's just more player friendly. It's more user friendly.
Yeah.
And that'd be really cool, because of course, what that means then as well is that you're not carrying fucking full different casting tools.
And you could then make hybrid tools and different tools that would affect different things. So you get like a chime that can also cast pyromancy. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, a chime that can cast pyromancy and only miracles, for instance.
Yeah.
Instead of being able to cast miracles and hexes, like that sort of thing would be really cool. But don't split hexes into like staff only and catalyst only when that's not, because that just restricts builds. Yeah. That means that you have to invest in this and this, whereas you can streamline it and it'll be much better.
Yeah. So I'd say that that's pretty much it for this video. This is pretty
that
much
covers
all
it.
the thoughts we have on Dark Souls 3 and the Souls series in general.
Yeah, so we're thinking just take the best from every game and parp it all into one.
Yeah.
But of course, make it have some flaws so that we have a reason to buy the next one. That'd be nice too. But
Just make it so it has jump scares every 15 minutes.
yeah, fuck it, put in a Five Nights at Freddy's arena.
Yeah.
Do that. PewDiePie will love it. But yeah, that's pretty much our wish list, guys. Let us know what you want.
Yeah.
If there's anything you want, if there's any points that you want to
Contest.
Yeah, that you want to contest in a civilized manner. Don't
Yeah.
be a fucking gorilla and throw shit at the wall. But you know, like, we're open to discussion, obviously. So let us know what you guys think. Let us know if there's anything that you think we missed that we should be in the game. And yeah, that about covers it.
Yeah.
See you guys in the next one.
Bye.